There once was a kingdom far, far away where everyone lived happily ever after. There was no war, no famine, and everyone was best friends. The king and queen ruled with a firm but fair hand, and their son, Prince Charming, was the most eligible bachelor in the kingdom. Now, Prince Charming had a problem. He had just celebrated his 18th birthday, but he still hadn't found his one true love. His parents were starting to get worried because it was getting harder and harder to set up suitable meetings with eligible princesses from neighboring kingdoms. Charming had been set up with more princesses than anyone could remember. But he had managed to avoid marrying any of them. All the princesses who had come to marry him had ended up going home alone. Then one day, the king and queen decided that enough was enough. They called Prince Charming into their office and told him that he would marry a princess from the neighboring kingdom of far, far away, whether he liked it or not. And so the royal coach was summoned, the horses were saddled, and off they went to the neighboring kingdom to meet the mysterious princess. When they arrived at the palace in the kingdom of far, far away, the king and queen were shocked. The princess wasn't beautiful, she wasn't graceful, and she certainly wasn't poised, in fact. The only nice thing about her was that she had a lovely singing voice still. It was too late to back out now, so the king and queen ushered Prince Charming towards the princess and said, "You two are getting married, like it or not." Now, this is where things get a little weird. As the wedding ceremony began, the king pulled out his phone and snapped a photo of the happy couple. But before he knew it, both the prince and the princess collapsed on the floor dead. The king and queen were shocked, but they quickly recovered and figured that maybe something in the photos made them feel unwell, so they instructed their servants to take the photo and burn it. Then they went to check on their son's body, but when they got to the chapel, they found that Prince Charming had also died. At this point, the servants were getting pretty scared. The king and queen, however, were furious. Someone had murdered their son, and they would get to the bottom of it. First, they had the photo analyzed. It turned out that nothing in the photo was harmful. Then they brought in the royal physician, who discovered that the prince and the princess had died from a rare but highly contagious virus. As it turned out, the virus was airborne, and all it took was a tiny, almost undetectable scratch on the skin for someone to be infected. But that still didn't answer the question of why the three royals had suddenly dropped dead. During the wedding ceremony, the king and queen racked their brains trying to figure out who would want their son dead. But no matter how hard they tried, they couldn't think of anyone. Finally, the king decided that the best course of action would be to send for the neighboring kingdom's royals and demand answers. When the king and queen of far, far away heard what had happened, they were devastated. They sent over their royal physician, who discovered that the princess had been suffering from a rare but highly contagious virus. The king and queen of the neighboring kingdom had been so worried about their daughter infecting the royal family. They had secretly treated her with a special ointment that made her immune to the virus. But they had no idea that this ointment was extremely rare and very dangerous. The side effects were so bad that the princess often broke out in hives and even went blind for a few days at a time. Now, since the virus was airborne, all it took was a tiny, almost undetectable scratch on the skin for someone to be infected. And unfortunately, the princess's ointment had reacted badly with Prince Charming's skin, causing the virus to spread and eventually kill them both. Not only that, but the stress of the wedding had caused the king and queen to become extremely ill, and they died soon after. In the end, the entire royal family of the kingdom of far, far away was wiped out, except for one lone survivor, the king's younger brother, who would go on to marry the princess from the neighboring kingdom, and they lived happily ever after, except for the part where they died in the same photo. That was weird.